Before the first shot was fired, before trenches scarred the earth and skies filled with smoke, another war was already underway, one fought not with rifles and shells, but with gold, debt, and influence. At the dawn of the 20th century, Europe stood balanced on a knife's edge. Empires glittered with the illusion of stability. London, Paris, and Berlin thrived as centers of wealth and progress. But beneath that prosperity lay a fragile financial network, one that would soon unravel under the weight of ambition and bloodshed. The true story of World War I begins not in the trenches, but in the banks, boardrooms, and stock exchanges that quietly dictated the flow of nations. This is the story of the financial front, the secret war behind the Great War. The fragile balance. In 1914, the world economy was more connected than ever. The gold standard acted as its spine, every major currency tied to a fixed weight in gold. Trade flourished, and credit seemed endless. But that same interconnection meant a single spark could send shockwaves through every empire. Britain's pound sterling dominated global trade, its value backed by gold reserves held in the vaults of the Bank of England. France and Germany, each powerful in their own right, relied on that same stability. The system worked until nationalism began to pull at its seams. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand may have lit the match, but the explosion that followed was powered by economics, by the machinery of money that would fund for years of destruction on an unimaginable scale. War breaks out, and the money stops moving. When war erupted in August 1914, Europe's financial arteries froze overnight. Stock markets shut down. Banks suspended gold payments. The old rules of commerce collapsed in days. For decades, European nations had trusted in gold, the ultimate promise that paper could be redeemed for something real. But with war came panic. People rushed to withdraw their savings. Governments, terrified of losing their reserves, locked their vaults and printed emergency notes. Within weeks, the gold standard, the foundation of global finance, was gone. The world had entered a new era where faith in paper, not gold, would decide survival. And at the heart of it all stood the financiers, men who understood that control over money meant control over war itself. The bankers of empire. In London, the Bank of England worked furiously to keep Britain solvent. The Treasury issued war loans, bonds that ordinary citizens and powerful investors alike were urged to buy. "Lend your money to your country," the posters read. Behind the patriotic slogans, a cold truth lingered. The empire was borrowing its way through war. Across the Channel, France mortgaged its future to maintain the fight. In Berlin, Germany financed its armies through massive public debt, believing victory would make repayment irrelevant. And behind these nations stood a shadow network, the great banking, dynasties that spanned borders even as the nations they served fell into conflict. The Rothschilds, with branches in London, Paris, Vienna, and Frankfurt, found themselves torn by loyalty and survival. The war fractured even their empire, but others saw opportunity. American financiers, led by houses like J.P. Morgan and Co., supplied Britain and France with everything from rifles to railway steel, and in doing so, positioned the United States as the new financial capital of the world. America enters the game. Before the war, America had been a debtor nation. Its capital flowed overseas to fuel European expansion. But by 1917, the balance had reversed. The Allies owed billions to American banks, and Wall Street now dictated the pace of war. J.P. Morgan became the Allied purchasing agent, managing billions in contracts and loans. Every bullet fired on the Western Front, every uniform, every rations tin, it all passed through American hands. When the U.S. finally entered the war, it wasn't just an act of politics or principle. It was also an act of finance. America had too much money at stake to let the Allies fail. The true cost of victory: by 1918, the war had drained Europe dry. Gold reserves vanished. Debt soared beyond comprehension. The old world of kings, empires, and unquestioned currencies was gone. Britain emerged victorious, but no longer dominant. France was scarred and indebted. Germany was crushed, forced to pay reparations that would cripple its economy and sow the seeds of another, even deadlier conflict. The United States, meanwhile, held the world's gold and much of its debt. The balance of power had shifted across the Atlantic. But the war's financial victory came with a curse: the illusion that prosperity could be built on debt and paper. The legacy of the financial front: in the decades that followed, the world would struggle to rebuild its faith in money. The gold standard returned briefly, but never with the same strength. By the time the Great Depression hit in 1929, the fragile system shattered once more. World War I had not just redrawn borders, it had rewritten the rules of global finance. Central banks gained power. Governments learned to print, borrow, and inflate their way through crises. And the ordinary citizen learned that wars could be fought not only on battlefields, but in the quiet dealings of men who never saw the front. The trenches rusted, the guns went silent, but the lessons of the financial front never faded. When the gold ran out, the illusion of stability went with it. Now, nations had to invent new ways to fund the impossible. And so began the real war, not in the trenches, but in the treasuries. Germany, blockaded by sea and cut off from international markets, turned inward. Its leaders launched a national crusade of borrowing war loans. They called them. The posters were everywhere: heroic soldiers charging into battle, mothers and children smiling bravely beneath the flag. Invest in victory, they urged. Ordinary Germans emptied their savings accounts, believing their money was helping win the war and that it would return multiplied after victory. But the victory never came. When defeat arrived, those war bonds became worthless scraps of paper. Families who had given everything for the fatherland now faced ruin. It was not just an economic collapse, it was a spiritual one. The resentment that followed would linger, festering until it tore the world apart again 2 decades later. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Britain had a powerful advantage: trust. The City of London was still the beating heart of global finance. And Britain's empire stretched from Canada to India, its trade networks webbed across the globe. When the war began, London turned to those networks for help. First came short-term loans, treasury bills, patriotic campaigns to back the boys. But the British Treasury knew this would not be enough. They needed deeper pockets. And so they looked west, across the Atlantic. The United States was still officially neutral, but its bankers saw opportunity. Firms like J.P. Morgan and Co. became the silent financiers of the Allied cause. They arranged vast loans, bought up munitions, food, steel, and quietly transformed New York into the new nerve center of global finance. By 1917, even before America entered the war, Wall Street had already become the Allies' lifeline. This was not charity. It was business. For every shell fired, every rifle shipped, every crate of food sent to Europe, there was profit. And by the time the guns fell silent, America would no longer be a debtor nation. It would be the world's creditor. This is how the financial empire of the 20th century began. Not with conquest, but with credit. France, too, struggled beneath the crushing costs. Still haunted by its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, it had rebuilt its defenses at enormous expense. Now it poured money into another war it could not afford. The French people, famous for their thrift, were urged to buy government bonds just like the Germans. Patriotic posters lined the streets of Paris, promising that every franc invested would help defend the nation's honor. But even with this domestic support, France leaned heavily on its allies. American loans again became its lifeline. Russia's situation was even more desperate. Its empire was vast, but its finances primitive. Factories were few, railroads were scarce, and its banking system fragile. The Tsar's government borrowed heavily from France and Britain, hoping to buy time. But defeats on the battlefield, food shortages, and rampant inflation shattered public confidence. By 1917, the ruble was collapsing, and with it, the old order. The Russian Revolution was as much a financial implosion as a political one. Across every empire, the story was the same. The war was not just fought with armies, it was fought with borrowing. By the time it ended, the Allied powers had spent over $140 billion, and the Central Powers about $60 billion, sums the world had never seen before. These debts reshaped the world more profoundly than any treaty ever could. The gold standard, once the anchor of global stability, was gone. Inflation tore through entire economies. Germany would soon descend into hyperinflation so extreme that a loaf of bread could cost billions of marks. And who suffered most? Not the bankers, not the ministers, but the ordinary people, the small savers, the working families, the shopkeepers. They had trusted their governments. They had bought the bonds, believed the speeches, and sacrificed their savings. And in return, they watched the value of their money disintegrate. Meanwhile, the wealthy, the connected, the insiders, they moved their assets abroad. They bought gold, land, or foreign currency. They knew what was coming. The lesson was clear. In a financial war, it's the small saver who bleeds first. The First World War didn't just redraw borders. It rewired the world's money. It proved that governments could suspend reality, print endlessly, and still persuade their people that everything was under control. They learned that confidence could replace gold, and that belief could be weaponized. Sound familiar? Because that discovery, that illusion, never went away.